Awesome. Cool. Well, as mentioned, my name is Andrew. I graduated from here I'm trying to stay on camera. Let me know if I walk off the camera. This way? All right, I'll stay behind the table. Um, so I graduated from tech in 2012, ECE. And yeah, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of getting started in your career and navigating the very, very wide variety of um, software engineering career paths, but a lot of it applies in general to different engineering disciplines. Um, and yeah, so I'll get started. Um, yeah, we'll get it. Cool. So this is just a little bit. This was my favorite spot on campus when I was an undergrad. I lived off campus up in Maple Ridge, for those of you that are familiar with Blacksburg. And this is where the bus would pick up and drop off on campus every day. And so I would sit on the hill by the bridge and wait for my bus or back home. So anytime I'm back on campus, it's one of my favorite spots to go back to. Um, cool. So yeah, a little bit about myself. Like I said, graduated here in 2012. A couple weeks after graduation, I moved up to New York City to go work at Bloomberg. I got my job there through the Virginia Tech Career Fair. I spent 8 years there. My first half as a software engineer through senior engineer. Um, Late 2016, I kind of decided to take the change in engineering management. I'll talk a little bit about that. And I was there for 4 more years. I switched over to Amazon. Actually started Amazon like the first week of the pandemic. It was a very interesting time to start a new job as everything obviously overnight went remote. Amazon had never onboarded people remotely before, so figuring out how to get your laptop set up and get connected to everything from home, they were figuring out in real time. I was there, for a couple of years. Went through the ranks of senior engineering manager for my last, I don't know, 18 or so months there. And then at the very end of 2024, I left Amazon, hopped over to Netflix, and started there in December. So coming up on 4 months now. Yeah, that's where I am currently, all in New York City. That's been my 13 years almost since graduation. Cool. So today we'll cover. I hope you hopefully feel a little bit more informed about careers in the software engineering field. It's one of the things you'll get out what you put into it. So if you have questions, if you want to go deeper on a topic, if you want to understand a little bit more, or something doesn't make sense, please let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions. Cool. So a couple of things we'll cover is all the different career decisions you might be faced with coming out of college and even in your early career. You'll hear a lot of things about different levels and ratings and things like that and what those actually mean in not just like in textbook or not just like on paper, but actually in practice. What kind of some of the decisions if you want to continue as an individual contributor or IC versus the engineering manager route. And then the importance and some tips for just building your network and kind of staying connected to both professional and alumni communities. So we'll jump into it. Career decisions. So it's easy to get stuck in like analysis paralysis. You're stuck with all sorts of different decisions. What size company do I want to join? Anything from small startups, mid-sized tech companies, big tech companies, defense contractors, big banks, and obviously government, all and everything in between. And what's different things to consider? So there's pros and cons to each, and there's no one right or wrong answer. Obviously, with Bloomberg, Amazon, Netflix, I've stayed in the big tech world. I've interviewed at a number of startups, and when I was leaving Bloomberg, if you'd asked me at the time, I actually would have told you I wanted to go to a startup. Clearly, I went to Amazon, which was the opposite end of the spectrum, but the reason was one of the appeals for startups to me was that you get to wear a lot of hats. So you get at a startup, there's not huge marketing orgs, sales orgs, product orgs, data science orgs. You kind of have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades and kind of fit whatever the team needs, whatever the project needs at that time. And I kind of like that idea. When I was at Bloomberg, I was a massive company, 20-some thousand employees. There were dedicated orgs for data science, for marketing, for sales, for product, for program management, for engineering, and you kind of were the intention and where you were able to deliver the most was by focusing on your kind of area of expertise. And a lot of things were abstracted away. So you didn't have to worry about how your software was deployed, how your software was built, how your software was tested. Those things were kind of automated so that you could just focus on purely feature development, application development, which was nice when I was a new grad out of college. I was able to really learn those skills. But as I kind of went through my career a little bit, I wanted to try out some of those other different disciplines and see where I could, which of them, if like interest or kind of help round out my skill set of how these things go from ideas to actual products that are sold and marketed to customers. Um, Obviously, I didn't end up at a startup. I ended up at Amazon. But when I joined Amazon, I was in a new business that they were a smaller business that was kind of still getting up off the ground, a subset of their advertising organization. And I did have the opportunity to work directly with sales, to work directly with customers, work directly with finance to think about how do they set revenue metrics? How does revenue metrics that are set end up turning into software projects? How do they go to customers to get commitments for sales? All those things, which I think help me and my teams build better software, which is what I was looking for. Um, and so again, there's pros and cons at big tech and even mid-sized tech companies. A lot of the things that you are kind of ancillary to your day to day are all taken care of because they have those economies of scale. Even things like onboarding and ramping up, like Bloomberg had a phenomenal program for coming right out of college. I think at the time it was 12 weeks, where you get to go learn what what looks like to be an engineer at Bloomberg and in the industry. Startups aren't going to have as much of a formalized onboarding experience. Now, I'm sure some startups do have more than others. Obviously, a 5 or 7 person startup is different than a 50, 100, 200 person startup. Um, so again, no one right or wrong answer, but just things to consider as you start to look at where you might want to go. Obviously, the other aspect of startups is a lot of the compensation is in the equity in the company, which could go really well, could go nowhere. That's part of the bet you're making. Whereas at the big tech, defense contractors, big banks, like your compensation is either in cash stocks that are much more liquid. Again, pros and cons, but just things to consider. Location. So if you're in the major metropolitan areas, obviously where we are now, New York, SF, Austin, Nashville even has gotten some more and more. If you're in these areas, you have naturally a lot like job opportunities. For me, being in New York, I was able to move from Bloomberg to Amazon to Netflix without having to move apartments, relocate my family, move anything else, like all like that. Which, when you're just out of school, is might be more open to moving and flexible. Seattle's another big one, obviously, that has a lot of tech companies. But as people plant their roots and things like that, families, all that, it becomes certainly more disruptive, although not obviously not impossible to pick up and move. So I've kind of always gravitated towards these cities where I could. Lots of tech options, lots of places to interview. You end up meeting lots of people at other tech companies and other companies that are hiring engineers that you never know when one could turn into an opportunity. Remote versus in office. So big topic at the moment, obviously. Obviously, when I started in 2020, 2012, everything was in office. It was not even a conversation. When I first started at Bloomberg, we didn't even have laptops. I know that seems like forever ago, but you had to go in, you had a desktop at your desk, and when you went home, we had an app on our phone-ish, but it was pretty much you went to work, and that was where you did your work. Um, Obviously, in my time there, we migrated to having laptops and people could work, but it was still the expectation was you were in office. Obviously, 2020 happened, people all went remote, and now the companies are taking different approaches to coming back into office. My stance is that, especially early in your career, there's a lot of value about being in office. Um, there's a lot you get sitting shoulder to shoulder next to people. There's a lot of conversations that happen when you turn your chair to the person next to you or you are having lunch with someone that are just very hard, if not impossible, to recreate virtually. Um, and so I learned a ton by just sitting next to senior engineers, sitting next to my manager, sitting next to other peers, and just kind of being able to overhear their conversations or quickly ask them a question that I wouldn't say, hey, do you have time for a call? Or even solve things in a few minutes of conversation that would have taken a 30-minute meeting I could set up and you're not free till the next day, and just longer feedback loops. Now, there's pros to remote, obviously flexibility. At Netflix, we're a little bit more remote friendly now, which I think has helped us, at least in our group, widen our talent pool. We can hire anywhere in the United States and even outside the United States, which obviously a bigger pool of talent. So pros and cons. But I think especially early in career, there's a lot of value of being in office. Doesn't necessarily have to be 5 days a week, but some of that time in office, sitting next to the colleagues, sitting next to your more experienced peers, I think pays a lot of dividends. So continuing on, other decisions, company culture. Company culture makes a big difference. And like even among big tech companies, Microsoft versus Amazon versus Google versus Facebook, for example, all have pretty distinct cultures. And now all the companies have been wildly successful, obviously. So there's not saying one's better or worse than the other. It might be what you're looking for. It might be how you work best as an individual. But yeah, these companies have very, very different cultures. Sometimes some of them are pretty public, like if you go online and search about Meta's culture or Google's culture or Microsoft's culture. Although even within a company that size, there's like micro cultures within teams and organizations and departments. Um, but a couple things. So we'll talk a little bit more about building your network later, but leverage your network, ask people on LinkedIn, look for mutual connections, look for former classmates that graduated that are working these places, and just ask them, hey, what is it like working there? What's the company culture? How would you describe your day to day? And then during your interviews, you should really treat those as two-way conversations and ask them, hey, what's the company culture? How would you describe the culture? If the interviewer had worked other places before, ask them, hey, how would you compare? Um, I used to always ask during my interviews, what's one thing you would change if you could about the company culture? Because nowhere's perfect. Um, so in general, the company culture will make a big difference in your day to day, and try to be as informed as you can. Another popular one, tenure versus job hopping. As you saw, I've been at Bloomberg. I was at Bloomberg for 8 years, Amazon for 5, and then now I've been at Netflix for 4 months. Um, I find a lot of value in staying somewhere long enough to start to build up your own reputation. Um, build up your own reputation, build up some domain knowledge, have some expertise in how that company works. How do they build products? How do they launch? Who are their customers? What are the problems their company's facing? And how you're working to help solve those. And so I personally have found benefits there in staying longer. And like I mentioned earlier, I went up the engineering manager track in order to kind of go through the management transition from an individual contributor. You kind of need to be somewhere long enough where people are confident in giving you that position and that you can show that you have the skills, soft skills, and technical skills necessary to lead those teams. Um, but I have friends that have hopped jobs every 2 years. I have friends that have worked for 2 years at Bloomberg, 2 at Facebook, 2 at Uber. Now they're at Figma, I think. Um, but sometimes there's short term, you can get compensation bumps. Sometimes you can negotiate better. Your most negotiating power is when you're kind of during the job offer process. So there's no one right or wrong answer. Um, like I said, personally, I found a value in staying somewhere long enough, build up a reputation, um, help make a difference, see your projects, see your ideas from idea through development through out to the impact on whoever your products you're building for, and kind of making sure that you can get as much as you can from that team or company. Even in my time at Bloomberg, I switched. I was on 3 different teams internally there, so I moved around internally before finally taking the hop externally. And last but not least, remember it's not permanent. In this day and age, it's almost certain that your first job is not going to be your last. Um, you will learn what's important to you. You will learn how you work best. What's important to you may change over time. When I was 22 years old, what's important to me then it was very different than what's important to me now. Um, and that's okay. And so make an informed decision, try to think about all these different angles. But remember, it's not, you can always change if it's you end up in a situation where you want something different, a better opportunity comes up, or what's important to you changes over time. You have that flexibility. Cool. So for early career, I think a couple of things stand out. So curiosity. So try to go learn as much as you can. The companies are a wealth of knowledge. The people you work with, your manager, your peers, your product stakeholders, your sales, your finance people, go understand how your software is, or how whatever you're working on, software or not, how is it being used? What are the problems you're trying to solve? People that are using what you're building every day, what does their day to day look like? How is what you're working on improving their day to day? What are the measures of success? Um, what are the inputs that are coming in to inform what you're building? What are the outputs? Where are they going? How are they used to kind of paint the whole picture to really help move the business? Um, that leads into being very proactive. So one of the biggest things when people join my team or in general talking to new grads, they always ask like, oh, what's the difference between someone who's really, really successful or in their career and someone that kind of just like goes through the motions. And I think the biggest difference is being really proactive in kind of seeking, not just seeking out information, but taking on tasks and going and finding problems and solving them. So if you sit and you wait for your manager or your mentor or whoever's in charge of kind of helping divvy up your work to say, hey, you should go work on this now, and you do a good job at that, you'll be okay. You'll be fine. You'll meet the expectations of your role. But in order to really kind of exponentially grow, I found that what makes the biggest difference is people that constantly go find problems and then solve them without being asked. And that will help you, A, learn a lot more than just the slice of the kind of piece of work that you've been assigned, and also help show your impact. And as your manager or your team, however your kind of work is divvied up, is looking at who's ready for more responsibility or who's ready to take on the next big thing. It's very easy for them to go to the person who's already been showing that they can take on more and take on more and proactively doing that. Part of that, you can find mentors. In general, my tips for mentorship is that like you should drive the conversation. Don't expect a mentor to come to you and be like, here's my wealth of information that I'm just happy to give you, because they're busy. They're probably mentoring other people. They don't know what's most relevant to you, most helpful to you. So anytime you have a mentor, and this applies throughout your career, so like mentors through, I've had mentors all throughout. You should drive that conversation. So you say, hey, here's something I've been struggling with. Do you have any tips that you could help me with? Or, hey, um, here's an area I'd like to learn more. How do you suggest going to learn more about that? Or here's a skill that like I've kind of seen that I really am not as strong on as I'd like to be. How could I help develop that? But either way, trying to be intentional about what you're looking for from a mentor, and seeking them out. If you're at a new company or you're new in the field, you don't know who the right mentor is, ask your manager, ask your peers. They'll find someone who can help you in whatever areas you're looking for. Cool. And then this goes back to the curiosity, is building up domain knowledge. So when I joined Bloomberg, I was working on like financial services stuff. I didn't really have a ton of background on that. Obviously, I came through an engineering degree here, going and learning a lot. Hey, how's this used? How do our customers use this? Who are our competitors in the market? What are they doing? What do we need to be doing? What are our big goals for the next 6, 12, 18 months? How are we working towards those? Similarly, when I then switched over to Amazon, very different domain, spent a lot of time asking people who'd been in the industry for a long time, hey, how's this? How do customers use this? These things sound good on paper. How does this actually get used in reality? And trying to connect those dots. And then as a manager, I try to kind of give that context to my teams, because I do think it helps you build better products if you understand the full life cycle of how they use problems they're solving, people that are using your applications in their day-to-day. This kind of goes a little bit back to proactiveness as well. But I've been through many times when people are like frustrated, they got passed over for a promotion or the next big project. And then I'm like, well, you never told me you were interested in that. So like I have 10, 12, whatever, 25 people on my teams. It's like I'm looking out for everyone, and I don't know. I mean, I have my own assumptions or intuition of what you're interested in, what kind of where you are in your career, what goals you're looking for. But should be the biggest proponent of your own career growth, and that applies throughout your whole career. Um, but it's up to you to kind of say, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Here's what opportunities I want. Here's the next promotion, or I want to move into management, or whatever it is. Then you work with your manager to make that happen, to find those opportunities. Or they'll tell you, hey, you're not quite ready for that yet. Here's what you need to do to get ready for that. But you should drive that conversation. I've seen a lot of people get frustrated because they don't drive that conversation. Then they feel like they got passed over for an opportunity that they would have been excited about or they deserved, but they never raised their hand and said they were interested in it. So own your own career growth and try to understand full circle what you're building, own your career. Those will be very helpful in making sure that you're successful, not just early in your career, throughout your career, but especially as you get started. Cool. So this is more specific to the software track, but you'll hear a lot of these things. And if you go online, if you're in the software realm and hardware too, depending on companies, you'll see a lot of these things: L3, L4, L5, staff, principal, EM, SDM. And good news is a lot of information is on the line about what those things are. You can ask your recruiters, ask your friends, ask your network. Companies all name their levels differently. So at Amazon, when you first start, you're a L4. At Facebook or Meta, if you first start, you're an E3. Um, some companies call like some companies have like EM for engineering managers. Other companies call them software development managers. Some companies call staff engineers, principal engineers. There's a lot of different labels, titles, levels out there. Um, Ask questions either to the recruiter, online, LinkedIn, different, couple different resources I'll share in a bit. But overall, my major takeaway is don't get too hung up on them. Um, usually it's much more about like what do they actually mean underneath the hood rather than how does that company decide to kind of label their different levels or roles. Um, cool. So again, a little more specific to at least software or some hardware in the big tech space as well. There's a lot of different career paths you can take. And sometimes at the beginning, it can be a little intimidating in terms of, oh, do I want to go up the individual contributors stack or do I want to switch to manager? These things are all called different things at different places. Um, but I think there's trade-offs. There's no one right answer. I think it's really most about where you'll be most effective, what you're most interested in, and what the company and team needs. And the most important thing is that you can switch back and forth. People think it's like we use this concept a lot of called one-way doors or two-way doors. One-way door meaning once you've walked through it, it's very difficult or impossible to walk back through it. Two-way door meaning you're like, oh, you can go back and forth fairly freely. It's not too much of a set in stone decision if you pick one or the other. Um, People can go back and forth between these. And a lot of times people think, oh, if I go the engineering manager route, that's permanent. I can never go back to being a individual contributor. Or, oh, if I rise up the ranks through the individual contributor route, I'm kind of pigeonholing myself to not have the opportunity to get to a manager. Or some people think that, oh, to go higher up the rankings, I have to go be a manager. Usually not the case these days. So different paths, pros and cons. It's really up to you. And also on the titles, like don't look too much into the titles because I have friends that are VP of engineering at a startup that have a team of 6 or 7 people. Meanwhile, I have friends that are senior engineering managers at FANG companies that have teams of 50, 70 engineers. And again, it's not that one's better than other, but it's just sometimes people see a title of a VP of engineering or a CTO at a startup, and then they are interviewing around and they go to an engineering manager somewhere else, and it's hard to compare them. Um, so my point is don't look too much into titles at any point in your career. Different companies label things differently across domains as well. At banks, people become VPs very early in the engineering rank versus a VP of engineering at a big tech company is not going to come until much later in your career, if ever. And government contractor has their own kind of way of defining the different levels as you go through the ranks. So my main takeaway is don't worry too much about the labels. Their titles, they're labeled differently everywhere. It's not apples to apples when you're comparing between companies, industries, company sizes. Focus on the scope, impact, priorities of the role, where you are in your career, what are your objectives, and what's the larger company culture you're looking to join. Those things will all make a much bigger difference in your day-to-day than what labels in front of your role. And when you're interviewing around or you're considering other companies or you're opening roles you see online, try to understand what the role actually means, not just the title. Last, again, don't overemphasize on titles. People get very hung up on them. I have friends still that have been working for 12, 13, 15 years that are still like, oh, I'm currently whatever level. I don't want to go down a level at a different company. And it's just the wrong thing to focus on because that's not actually going to impact your day-to-day job satisfaction, career growth, overall impact. Right? It won't be the only thing that no, just stop working. The battery died. Cool. I can use the space bar. Cool. So, individual contributor versus engineering management. So I'll stand over here so I can use the laptop. So there's a number of things to consider. And there's no one right or wrong answer. It's really what resonates most with you. So on the left is kind of how you some of the things I kind of see as an individual contributor. On the right is a lot of the qualities, day-to-day responsibilities as an engineering manager. In the middle is where there's overlap. So they're definitely not. So I consider engineering management has kind of three aspects to it: people management, product management, and technical leadership. Um, the technical part obviously overlaps strongly with the individual contributor. Uh, the people management, and even as a senior individual contributor, you'll start to get very involved in product management, product development, understanding the kind of go-to-market, sales, marketing aspects. The people management is really, really the biggest part of a engineering manager role that you have to decide and kind of work out is that what you're interested in and what you're most excited about and how you want to be spending your time. Um, Personally, one of my favorite things about about the engineering manager role is the people management part, and that's what drove me to the engineering manager. Is I like building teams. I like working with a diverse background of people, different personalities, learning styles, strengths and weaknesses, and kind of putting them all together to make like the team stronger than any of the individuals that make up the team. And I really like when people have that like light bulb moment and they do more than they thought they were capable of. Kind of push their comfort zone, push their boundaries, see they can take on more than they thought. Um, Growing, mentoring people that way. I really like that, which is what gravitated me and why I've stayed towards engineering management specifically. Some of the other things on here, uh, I've mentored and helped a few people go from the individual contributor route to the engineering manager route. And the thing they struggle with the most is the last thing in the list there. As an individual contributor, your outputs are very well defined. You're told to go work on this task, it gets done. It's not very, it's kind of Boolean. It either is or it isn't. It's released, you go on to the next thing. As a manager, it's much, much more vague to define like what your success looks like. You're not releasing a piece of software or application or product. You're really measured by the output of your whole team, the health of your team, which is very hard to like, oh, go from to do to in progress to done. It's an ongoing thing. It's ever changing, and it's much more vague in terms of like, am I doing a good job? Um, and yeah, so other things that as an engineering manager, you're thinking a lot about org structure, organizational health. Hey, do I have like a key person dependency? If this person leaves my team, my whole team fall apart. How do I mitigate that? Do I need to grow the team? Do I have the right people on the team for what we need to do in the next 6, 12, 18 months? Those are all things that we're thinking about. Whereas the IC individual contributor track is lot more kind of hands-on keyboard implementation, architecture, mentoring junior engineers, helping to up-level the skills of the team, and things like that. So again, there's no one right or wrong answer. And like any company, anywhere, a team I've been on, like you don't have a strong team without both of these aspects, obviously. So it's really primarily about um, what do you enjoy the most? So I tell people, and I have people on my team that are like, oh, like in order to grow, I want to grow the engineering manager route. Like, well, that's an option, but you're not going to be more successful there if that's not what you want to be doing. Like if you go do that just because that's what you think the path for growth is, um, maybe you get there, but then you're like, wow, this is not what I want to be doing day to day. I want to be back to doing architecture or implementation of projects, features, things like that. So it's what do you enjoy the most? Where do you get the most gratification? Like I mentioned, I really like the building teams, mentoring individuals, growing people, thinking about like the overall organizational health and structure, and do we have the things that we need to be successful, uh, understanding where the business wants to go in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. So that's why I gravitated towards that track. But it's really mostly about what you enjoy and where you think you'll be most successful and have the most impact. Um, this is from Amazon. I really like the way they phrase this is instead of telling people they have like strengths and weaknesses, it's really talking, they really hone in on what are your superpowers. So what do you do that's better than the most of your peers? And that's different for everyone. And that's where I think that when you're considering in general career moves, but specifically the individual contributor or manager track, think about like what are your superpowers? What do you do better than everyone else? If you're the best architect on your team or you're the best Java, JavaScript, whatever kind of coding technologies or whatever the technologies are at your company or your team. If you're the best at that specific technology, you're probably best leaning into that and seeing, hey, how can I maximize that more? How can I help up level the whole team? How can I help up level the whole company in this area of my expertise? Um, I like to think that some of my superpowers around building teams, mentoring, growing people, understanding where the business is going and marrying that with the technical side. which helped kind of me to go towards the engineering manager track. But it's really thinking about what are your unique strengths, your unique superpowers that separate you from everyone else, and leaning into those is where I think people have the most success and also grow the fastest. How do you want to spend your time? Do you want to be spending your time in one-on-one conversations, helping people through difficult careers, helping resolve tension between two people on your team, helping balance how do we kind of hire up people quickly, but also we need to make sure that we're not slowing down the team by having too many people joining at once. Those types of things, engineering manager. If you're really interested in like, hey, solving technical problems or identifying areas where the team has opportunity to improve, saying, hey, I've noticed that the team's been having a lot of issues in this one area. I want to go dive in and figure out the root cause of what's going on and fix that and drive that. No, again, team needs both. There's no one right or wrong. It's really how you want to spend your time and what you get the most gratification, satisfaction, motivation, what you'll be excited like waking up to go to work and work on every day. And then it obviously needs to be what the organization or team need. You might be super excited about going the engineering manager route, but if there's no opportunities for a manager, well, they're not going. That's kind of you're kind of shoehorning yourself into or backing yourself into a corner. Same thing. If you notice the team's really lacking a strong technical lead, that certainly is an input into helping to determine what you kind of what direction you might want to focus. And this changes over time too. So in my time at Bloomberg, when I first became a manager, I took over an existing team, had really strong technical leads. So I was less involved on that technical side. I was kind of learning to be a manager for the first time. And then while still at Bloomberg, I also went and go build a new product that didn't have any engineers on it when we first started. So I was much more technically involved until we hired and built up and staffed up the team. So part of it's looking at just where your organization or team is, what do you need? And if that is not what you're looking for, then maybe you have to consider if you want to switch teams or switch companies. Or you say, hey, you know what, right now I'm really going to lean into one track over the other because that's what the team needs. And maybe down the line, there'll be opportunities to switch there. So kind of taking all those into account. Like I mentioned, there's no one right or wrong answer. It changes over time. It changes person to person, but just things to think about as you consider what direction you want to take your career. And a lot of these times, actually, I would argue probably almost every time, you can try these things before you buy them. So if you tell your manager, your team, hey, look, and I want to try out being a manager, a lot of times they'll give you opportunity to lead a small cohort or mentor a few new hires or lead the internship program or lead a small project with 2 or 3 other engineers, whatever it might be, where you can try that out and be like, hey, you know what, you're in charge of breaking down the project, reporting on timelines, giving weekly status updates, dividing up work between the people on the team. And you can decide, hey, you know what, maybe not my thing. I'd rather just kind of go execute. Or you can say, hey, you know what, I really like this team dynamic, kind of helping shepherd the whole team along. I kind of like the manager route. So either way, whichever you want to try, whichever direction you think you might be leaning, work with your team, your organization, your manager, your mentors, and there's usually ways you can get a pretty good idea of what the day-to-day would look like without formally switching, and just make the most informed opinion that you can, or make the most informed decision that you can, rather. Cool. Networking is so Virginia Tech has an incredibly strong alumni network. I have been in touch with I'm like I said, moving up to New York City. So every year there's the Hokies on Wall Street, New York City alumni event that has like 300 some alumni at least every year. But the Virginia Tech alumni network is incredibly strong. If somebody reaches out to me that I've never talked to before and they're Virginia Tech alumni, I'm like significantly more likely to respond to them, acknowledge their random LinkedIn request or whatever, than if it's someone that I have no kind of alumni or any other connection with. So lean into those. If you're looking to, like I mentioned earlier, if you're looking to go join a company and you see, hey, go on LinkedIn and it'll show you directly, hey, there's some Virginia Tech alumni that work here. Reach out, ask questions. Both my last, I think, yeah, at least my last job, if not the one before that, we're not through Virginia Tech alumni connections, but through my network in general. And yeah, so leverage Virginia Tech's alumni network is very, very strong, and you should absolutely leverage that. LinkedIn, super powerful tool. They make it really easy to see connections you have at the company, second connections, mutual connections you have, different places, different cities, different companies, and pretty much any way you want to slice it. there's no shame in reaching out. But I would like just try to be, if you're going to reach out to somebody you've never talked to or you don't have there, try to give at least a little bit of a warm introduction. What are you looking for? How can they help? If you have any mutual connections, ask for introductions. But in the end, to this day and age, um, networking is a huge leg up over versus just applying cold online. Um, I know like when any of these big companies open their like new grad or internship openings, they'll get tens of thousands of applicants within minutes of the job being posted. And it's just very hard mathematically to stand out in a pile of 20,000 digital resumes. So reach out, you leverage your network, leverage on-campus events, leverage those ways. Try to get yourself a little bit more to at the top of the pile in some fashion. Yeah, find mentors. So it could be somebody who graduated a year before or 2 years before you. It could be somebody you worked with and a former classmate that's now in the industry. Could be professor, could be friend from prior, anywhere. But leverage your mentors, ask them, use that kind of power of the network to see how you can, again, be more informed, make connections, help yourself stand out when you're applying to jobs. Um, and in general, networking is something like you can't just do nothing and then expect one day it'll be there. It's kind of like over time, you're like investing in it, nurturing in it, building the network, keeping in touch with people, because you never know when you'll want to might cross paths again or might want to leverage some connection you have. But I strongly encourage people to do it on an ongoing basis. It's not something you can just turn the switch on one day and all of a sudden you have all these connections that you haven't talked to in a decade that now are ready to help you kind of go find your next role or help you make a decision. So networking is really powerful. It helps a lot in terms of helping you get a warm introduction or a referral or connected to a hiring manager or whatever it might be versus just kind of submitting a PDF online and hoping that your name gets picked. Cool. Some resources. These are, so LinkedIn we talked about. The top two are a little more specific for the software route, although I think they're expanding a little bit more. So if you're not familiar with levels.fyi, for software tracks, it's really, really good data on what companies are hiring, what companies are offering, job offers, what cities companies are hiring in general, kind of just really good intel about the overall job market. I've found their information pretty accurate on what companies are giving out as offers. So if you're at the stage where you're getting an offer, you want to know if you should negotiate. If you want to see where companies are hiring a lot, if you want to go filter by city and see what companies are hiring in a specific city, really, really good data. And it's all user submitted. So they've kind of, yeah, really good resource that's kind of popped up in the last handful of years. Blind is a mobile app. I mean, I guess it's a website too, but they're primarily a mobile app where people can anonymously post about their company. The 3 asterisks or 4 asterisks there are because you have to take it with a grain of salt, like any other kind of anonymous forum online. You have to discern the good from the bad. Just like if you're on Google Maps or Yelp and you are reading a review of a restaurant and someone gave it a 1-star review and they went on a rant, that doesn't mean it's a terrible restaurant. Same thing on Blind, especially at massive companies. There's always going to be someone who's disgruntled, feel like they were unfairly not passed over for an opportunity or unfairly given a bad performance review or whatever. Doesn't mean the whole company is a terrible place to be. There's a lot of times there's like the vocal minority of people that are posting. It's anonymous, so there's not a lot of verification on it. But if you discern the good from the bad, if you look at overall trends, same thing as if you're reading restaurant reviews or anything else, if you look at the overall trend, more recent reviews, kind of feedback, what kinds of things are you seeing if you over and over and over? Blind is a really good resource for getting information about company culture, companies that are hiring, companies that are, if you want to know, hey, how flexible these companies remote versus in office, or I know online the recruiter says that they're 3 days in. Is that strictly enforced or whatever, any of those types of things. Also really good information about benefits for companies. Hey, everything from 401k to healthcare to do they have a gym subsidy to any of these things. Pretty good information. Just the caveat that you have to discern the good from the bad. And LinkedIn, again, great resource for not just networking, finding out about companies. Most companies post their jobs on LinkedIn now. You can set up alerts for your companies, your city, your whatever you might be interested in, keywords. get alerted, and then it'll pop up and say, hey, job opened up at so and so. You have two connections there. You can reach out, etc. So in general, there's a lot of information out there. Leverage it. Just make yourself as informed as you can. But then, as I mentioned earlier, like you'll learn more throughout your career, and you can again, people job hop these days. Most people's first job will not be their last, but I certainly think with all the information out there, you can do a lot to set yourself up for success and get yourself in a really good place to start your careers. Um, cool. With that, I have 15 minutes for any. I don't know if people on Zoom have if somebody managing Zoom questions as well, but otherwise, if anybody has any questions, I am happy to answer anything. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrew. This is really useful. Thank you. Can you talk to us about your current job?
Yeah.
What type of, what are you working on?
Yeah.
How do you see, Netflix, growing in the coming few months?
Yeah. So my current role, so I joined Netflix in December as engineering manager. So obviously everyone knows Netflix streaming. There's obviously certainly there. That's kind of their started from DVDs, moved to streaming. That's kind of their bread and butter. There's a couple new areas Netflix is trying to move into. One is live events. So they had the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight last year. They had two football games on Christmas. They have a weekly live talk show now with John Mulaney. They recently signed a contract to have the exclusive streaming rights to the next Women's World Cup. So they're moving into live events. They're trying to do more and more into video games. And the other area they're trying to get more and more into is advertising. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, for the first time, Netflix launched an ad-supported membership. So it was like I think probably at the time, $6 or $7 a month versus the 20-some dollars a month for the no ads version. So those are kind of the areas the company is working on moving into. And they've been hiring up to kind of and building out teams focused on those kind of growth areas. Obviously, still the large majority of the company and its bread and butter is still the streaming area. And that's not going anywhere, and the content and their unique shows and all that. But they're trying to kind of see what other these businesses turn into like durable revenue streams and kind of areas for the company. And so when I joined, they were working on building those. Specifically within that, I work in like the ads domain. Yeah.
So I have two. So one on chat. As a manager, how do you keep your engineering technology skills fresh and current?
Yeah, really very good question. So at every company I've been at, the expectations as a manager are different in terms of how technically involved you're supposed to be or you're expected to be. So there's two things. One is what your expectation of your role is, like to make sure you're like doing your job. Two is like personally what you're interested in. I like staying interested in connected to the technology. Like I mentioned, part of the thing I really like about engineering manager is understanding sales, product, marketing, customers, finance, and all those angles and seeing how that actually turns into products that we build and deliver. So when I'm thinking about personally thinking about staying relevant technically, it's making sure that I'm involved with things like system design, technical design, architecture conversations, so that I can, to the best of my ability, and again, it depends a little bit about who's on your team too, because you have really, really strong tech leads. You can lean on them more versus if your team's a lot more junior, then the manager plays a more involved technical role. But the main focus is making sure that, or doing the best we can, it can't be not perfect, but doing the best we can to make sure that what we're building now will empower us to move faster 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now. Not we're going to get 6 months from now, be like, oh, shoot, we should have done this differently. Got to throw this away and start over. It's a lot of wasted time. It's expensive. And you'll end up, yeah, it just kind of slows the business down. So in terms of new technologies, so at all the companies I've worked at, they operate at like the largest scale across the internet, Amazon, Netflix, even Bloomberg scale is pretty massive. And so they're not usually the first person to jump to the newest technology. They kind of want to make sure that, hey, is this going to be durable? We don't want to adopt a new technology that then 6 months from now no one's using anymore, and now we're like the last people using it. So in terms of adopting new technology, it's keeping an eye on what's out there, but making sure that like this is something we want to adopt at an enterprise level that we think is going to be durable for years. And then really making sure the technologies that we're using are actually like solving the problems that we have. Like there's lots of new technologies. There's always new libraries, new engines, new tools. Um, and I kind of see them all as like tools in your toolbox, and you have to pick and choose which ones are actually solving the problems that you have at hand. Uh, and that's different for every team and company. And then a lot of times we'll do like proof of concept. So we'll say, hey, you know what? We're trying to debate between two different JavaScript frameworks. Let's try them out. Let's see, hey, which ones work, which ones don't work. The other part of it too is you have to keep in mind, what does everyone else on the team already know? If everyone already knows one tool and one framework, it's a very expensive decision to go tell everyone on your team or your company to go learn a new tool. And like, you should be pretty sure that there's a real benefit in getting everyone to do that before just saying, hey, I know you all know XYZ, now go do everything the other way. But there's times where it makes sense. When I first joined Bloomberg, the whole company pretty much did C++, which really helped joining as an ECE grad because we actually taught C++, whereas the computer science people at the time, computer science curriculum at the time came in with Java. But in my time at Bloomberg, like they realized that not everything needed like the high performance or like of C++. There was less and less people that knew C++ out there in the industry. And so a lot of the company moved towards Python and Java and more like industry standard front-end frameworks and things like that. So there's certainly times and place to pivot the technology, but it should be done intentionally, not just like, oh, this is the newest flashy thing, like we should go adopt it. And then to me, it's really thinking about like what are the right, more durable technical decisions, not just like always hopping between because it's expensive to jump around. Yeah. 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 Very good question. So I always tell people like, um, like we're very cognizant, like more hours, like there's only so many productive hours a day. You can't just, nobody can sit there and be like super productive at their computer for hours and hours and hours and hours, for any length of time. So it's like balancing, certainly being aware of like burnout or like losing, we don't want to like end up people quitting the job because they've been overworked. And I also think it's like, I think there's ups and downs. Like, yes, there's real times when we have deadlines. Like, sometimes these are like deadlines set by the industry. Like, we have a big conference coming up. We're demoing a new product that, like, yeah, we don't really want to move that. Or hey, like in the advertising world, a lot of dollars are spent, or a lot of dollars are allocated to different advertising companies once a year at the beginning of the year through this process they call upfronts. And if you miss that window, like you have to wait 12 months. So there's like a high cost of doing that. Other dates aren't that critical. It's like, yeah, we agreed we'd have it by March 19th, and if it slips to March 25th, like the world's not gonna, we're not gonna miss out on much. So I think it's trying to balance like where does the date really matter. So I usually like kind of think there's like three different levers you can pull. You can usually add more people to a project to a point. There becomes there's a book, a long time ago called like the Mythical Man Month, where you can't just keep adding more people and expect that it's going to go faster. At some point, it'll actually start to go slower. You can adjust the scope of what you're building. So, hey, can we release this in phases? Can we say, what's the most critical part we need to release today and the rest will stage out? Or can you adjust the timelines? And so I think kind of pull those levers and pick and choose. And I think in terms of making sure that you give that context to the team so they understand why we're doing what we're doing, not just because somebody up the chain told them they had to get it done by this Friday. It's like, no, it's like, hey, there's a big event we have to hit. Or, hey, you know what? I know we said this is too much. We're going to do this in phase 1, 2, 3 over the next 2 months instead of all up front. Or we're going to shift the date to give people more time. And I think as long as you balance that, give people those contexts, and make them feel like they're bought into part of that delivery and the execution, that I found that teams resonates well with people. They get bought in. They don't feel like they're just kind of being like handed an impossible task and told to go do it.
Andrew, thank you again. That was very insightful. Really appreciate that. What I wanted to ask you is, where do you think your career is headed now? Are you looking into the chief technologist, or chief engineering side of the house? Are you looking into product program management or TNL management of a portfolio or something of that nature? And also, any thoughts about moving over to a startup eventually or entrepreneurship. So if you can just kind of tell us a little bit about what
Yeah.
you're thinking for the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, that 10, 15 years is hard for me to predict. But no, currently, like I just started Netflix like 4 months ago, so that's where I'm currently kind of I'm really excited about my role and the opportunity there. I like staying on the engineering side, so again, I'll never say never, but a current plan would be stay on the engineering management track. Um, and yeah, so I like dabbling in the product side. I like understanding that. I like understanding how the business affects the products we're building. But I like staying close to the technology. Um, and so yeah, so I'll continue to kind of take the engineering management track and see where that goes. When I was at Amazon, I was senior engineering manager, the group of 60 or so engineers there. And then when I joined Netflix, I have a team of 6 or 7. Um, so it's kind of based on, in terms of team size and scope, it's really like what the company needs, what the team needs, what the business needs. I'm not too pressed on that. I like I like working towards like building really great products with smart people and great teams that I clearly can see the impact of what we're working on. Um, and yeah, when I've interviewed around, each time I've left jobs, I've interviewed at startups. I've definitely considered it. I haven't that opportunity hasn't worked out that I kind of really wanted to take that bet. I'll never say never. And then on the entrepreneur route, yeah, I would have to have an idea that I felt like I couldn't live with myself if I didn't give it a try. Um, I've liked working at the big companies. I've enjoyed all my time at them, and I would recommend any of them. When I left them, there was no like it was just kind of like I felt like I had learned a lot there. I wanted to try something new. I don't have anything bad to say about any of them. And so, yeah, like I would, again, if there was an opportunity where I felt like, you know what, like I don't want to go without giving this a shot, I would certainly, I wouldn't rule it out. But I haven't had an idea or something that I felt like so strongly about that, like, you know what, I'm going to go kind of pour everything into this and see where it goes so far. But we'll see.
Um, for our current students, is there a course or an experience from your time at Virginia Tech that helped you in each of your, going to Bloomberg, going to Amazon and to
Um,
Netflix?
Of course. So I did undergrad research in like the autonomous underwater vehicle lab in Blacksburg. I thought that helped me a lot. That was like very practical, like real world. Like we were given a project building this underwater autonomous submarine, and that was like taking a lot of the stuff that I had worked on in classrooms and textbook knowledge and like really applying it to a real world problem. So I felt like that was very valuable. Working in teams, how do you kind of manage that and situation? So that was probably like my most like tangible real world experience. I think I would have probably not gotten the job at Bloomberg had it not been for all my C++ and like kind of core ECE coursework that I took at the time was C and C++. But in terms of most practical to like what day to day was like when I started my job, I think some of the work with the undergrad research and like tying that, like I said, classroom textbook knowledge to like real world applications to solve a problem was probably the most applicable. Yes. Yeah. 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 Go ahead. Yeah. 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 Very, very popular question, topic. Um, so I think that obviously I'm sure it'll change over the next 6, 12, 18 months. Obviously, it's a very fast moving space. So far, I have not seen them have a huge difference on enterprise software. I have seen them help a lot with scripting, data analysis. Even we've started to dabble with them a little bit into helping do software testing and things like that. But in terms of like the core code the team's writing every day, um, we haven't seen that like start to be replaced by LLMs. Both at when I left Bloomberg, LLMs and AI wasn't quite a topic yet, but both when I was at Amazon and now at Netflix, there's like little kind of cohorts within the company where teams are trying things out, experimenting with different tools, seeing if there's a places where they can start to help make a difference. I still think a lot of I kind of tell my teams these things all the time. It's like writing the code is usually not the hardest part of the job. Writing the code is like usually like the easiest part of the job. The hardest part of the job is figuring out what code to write and more importantly, what code not to write. And I think that's still in a place where like, again, things can change. It's obviously very changing very quickly, but currently today, it's not in a place where the LLMs are making like architecture level decisions or picking between different technologies you should solve the problem. Um, will they get to a point where they could implement some functionality or refactor some code? Like I can certainly see that, but I haven't seen it where it's like, oh, we would need to like don't need as many engineers as we have today just to solve that. Although I think it is a little different in. I have some friends and stuff in like more like SaaS businesses, and they've done a lot with LLMs in terms of like scripting and automation that way. But in their terms of the enterprise scale software, again, like there's very few companies out there that are like solving problems at like the scale of Amazon or Netflix. Um, and like, yeah, they have not been replaced by LLMs yet, but yeah, go ahead. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so it's different in each company. Amazon was really, really big into architects because one of the things they helped part of like AWS has like a whole suite of different offerings and picking and choosing which ones to use and where and what types of problems they solve is like a domain expertise in of itself. So Amazon was really good about leaning in those architects. I don't know if they're like architects that actually did people management, but they were less hands-on coding and more sitting with different teams, both internally and externally, and helping advise on like, hey, what types of solutions might make sense to solve the problems you're doing. Um, so I saw them more in the individual contributor, like specifically like not managing people, but definitely more less on the hands-on keyboard, more on the understanding the business domain, understanding kind of what scaling challenges they have, or what data privacy challenges they have, or whatever the specifics to their domain are, and helping give guidance on those solutions and kind of sharing solutions they've seen work elsewhere and things like that. Yeah. One more. I do have to run to the airport, so I'll take the two more and then we'll go. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so PIP for anyone who doesn't know is like performance improvement plan. So yeah, in my time at Amazon, I never saw PIP you or as a manager, like I never saw PIP used unfairly. I think anytime a company's hiring thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of engineers, like some of them aren't going to be a good fit, and I think that's where I saw PIP was used. Um, the layoffs, again, every company's done layoffs differently, or reductions in force, I'm going to call them. Um, but I kind of see those as separate than the PIP. Like in my time at Amazon, like even when we were hiring like crazy in 2021, you were still expected as manager to make sure that you were upholding a high bar, and if anybody wasn't meeting expectations, you put them through performance improvement. That was very different than when I went through layoffs at Amazon in 2023, 2023, I think, where the managers, we had no say on who was being let go. It was purely a decision way above our heads. I don't even know all the variables that they use to decide. So, and again, I know Meta and Google and a bunch of others have gone through layoffs and such as well. So in terms of like making informed decision, yeah, like there's no magic answer. In terms of like doing your best to make sure you don't end up on a performance improvement plan. That goes through a lot of things I talked about, like early career success. Talk to your manager, make sure that you know what they're looking for from you, making sure that you're checking in on your deliverables. If you're not able, if your areas you're not meeting the bar, find a mentor, figure out what you can do to help successfully kind of raise your performance. But in terms of like doing the best you can to avoid like a layoff situation, they're hard to predict. Prior to 2023, big tech had never really done layoffs. And then all of a sudden it was kind of like everywhere. All the companies that were, even the ones that were considered like the safest places to go work, were doing layoffs. So I'm not going to pretend to know how to predict like where that goes in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. Yeah, I don't have a magic answer there. But I think that you can only control what you can control. And I think recommend to like tell everybody, and the same thing on my teams when I was at Amazon. Obviously, there was a lot of people who were anxious about layoffs and stuff. I told them like, hey, we just need to focus on what we can control. Do our best to do that. And then like, if there's things that happen outside your control, like there's probably nothing you could have done that would have changed that anyways. There's one, one more. Yep. Yeah, so I think it depends. If like there's a specialized area you want to go in, I think the extra academic experience can really help. If you're just going to like general software engineer route at a tech company, there's not really as much benefit of someone who has a PhD versus a master's. But if there's an area of specialty you really want to go in here, you want to like kind of try to like have a leg up in terms of just getting those opportunities and starting out in a company, certainly valuable. But just for the general like generic any big tech 2025 2026 new grad role, there's not much there's not much, at least what I've seen, not much difference given like between what level of like postgraduate kind of experience you have. Cool. All right, awesome. Thank you all very much. Yeah.